You are officially invited. Yes, you're invited to join us in Fertility Awareness Mastery. This is my 10-week program designed to help you gain confidence using fertility awareness. Whether you're actively avoiding pregnancy or looking to optimize your cycles for conception, we have a spot for you. We start on January 22nd. Are you ready to jump in? Head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program to reserve your spot today. That's fertilityfriday.com/group program. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 238. Welcome to the 238th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the Fertility Awareness Method and all things fertility. I'm excited to share with you today another installment of my Fertility Awareness reality series. I get so much great feedback from these episodes because, they're real women's stories and real women who some have been on hormonal contraceptives, some have not. But either way, real women getting together, sharing their stories. And especially, we're part of a culture that has a tendency to downplay women's experiences and not necessarily share real women's stories. And often we're not seeing women's stories from a woman's perspective. And so I feel that there's a lot of power in just allowing women to have the space to share their stories in the way that they experience them, in their own words, in their own voice, from our perspective. And especially over the last couple of years, I've spent a lot of time reading research studies, which has been extremely informative and really incredible. But what's interesting, about just in general, even the concept of science and scientific research, the research is still done by people and people still have their perspectives. And so there's a lot of research papers that I've read around issues of menstrual cycle health and the side effects associated with hormonal birth control, for example. And, the perspective that these studies are coming from and the person who's writing them doesn't necessarily change the results, but often changes how they're interpreted or what the significance is of those results. So I do feel that very strongly, obviously, that there is a lot of power just in women having the opportunity to share their experiences as they experience them. And I feel like we can learn so much from them. And, that's one of my favorite things about having a podcast, being able to connect with women, whether it's women who are my clients, women who I'm working with, or women in the community who are sharing their experiences. And also, of course, expert guests. But again, what really often excites me, other than their amazing tidbits and information and details and expertise, so that I can't just downplay that or discount that because that really excites me. But what excites me beyond that is their personal stories. And I feel like over the years, I've learned so much just by hearing women share their stories. So anyways, a bit of a tangent before today's episode, but I just felt inspired to share that because I really, really appreciate having the opportunity to share these episodes. And I really appreciate my clients for being so open and willing to come on air and share their experiences because, of course, not everybody is comfortable doing that. So I really appreciate that. Now, if you're listening to this episode in real time, you still have about a week, a little bit more than a week to join us in the next round of Fertility Awareness Mastery. And so for the next 10 weeks, starting on January the 22nd, 2019, we will be meeting every single week and really going through fertility awareness charting to get you to the point that you feel 100% confident in your ability to read and interpret your signs of fertility. And, it's a really unique and powerful experience. Whether you are currently actively trying to conceive, I know a lot of women jump in and join the program when they have been trying to conceive. They've been charting their cycle somewhat, often not that confident about identifying the exact right time for sex, but also concerned about what they may be seeing on their charts. So often, you might be seeing a few things that don't really line up with what you know to be the normal parameters, but not really sure what it means or what to do about it. And so that's a huge part of the program, really talking about how to identify issues with the charts, but also how to optimize your cycles, your fertility, and preparation for pregnancy, whether you are currently actively trying or planning to prepare in the future. So I know a lot of women jump into the program when they are in that preconception phase, and sometimes it's quite soon. Sometimes I'm working with a woman who's planning to, start trying within 3 months or 4 months. But other times I'm working with women who know that it's kind of further out. So whether it's a year from now, 2 years from now, or even a bit longer, but really want to have it in mind. Like, what can I do ahead of time to optimize my cycle while obviously avoiding pregnancy successfully until you're ready to start trying, but really optimizing the cycle and kind of having that opportunity to identify anything ahead of time. So if you fall into any of those categories, and another thing I should mention is that, I often get questions from women who are wanting to jump in and join the program, but not really sure if, I've never tried it before. Do I need to have charting experience? Or on the flip side, I have charted a lot, is this going to be really redundant? And what I say to both parties is that I have worked with women who've never charted. They're literally buying a thermometer while they're signing up. And for those women, just like the women who have charted their cycles for, a year or more, because I've worked with a number of women who have quite a bit of charting experience, because of the depth that we go into and because it's a different method than what you've been using, most likely, you do gain a lot from it. And so even though, regardless of your level of experience, you will find that you do gain a lot of clarity about the method itself, but also that insight into your menstrual cycle and how it reflects back to your overall health. So wherever you stand, I invite you to join us. There's about 1 week left. So if you've been kind of on the fence and you're waiting for the last minute, it is almost here. So head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program for details and also to apply. And you can always reach out to me if you have questions about the program or if you're wondering if it's a good fit. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/group program. Now let's jump into today's episode with Leah. And I'm really excited to be here with Leah today. Leah is part of my current 10-week fertility awareness group program. And at this stage, we're about halfway through. Yeah, I think we've gone through about halfway of the program. So we've been together for a little bit over a month. And you have kind of 2 charts under your belt, which is fun. And so I'd love to just start by asking you a little bit about your birth control history. If you've used hormonal birth control before, if not, and for how long, and I suppose what drew you to fertility awareness at this point in your life?
So I started the pill when I was 18 before I went to college. I can't remember the specifics, but I tried 2 or 3 different ones. I had awful migraines. They put me totally out of commission. They'd make me throw up. It was terrible. So the pill was not working for me, even when I tried different formulations. So I stopped that. And then when I started dating someone about a year after I had started the pill and wanted a better option for birth control. So I started the Mirena IUD. Had that for about 5 years and just had it removed this past spring, 7 months ago. Today, actually. And with the Mirena, I didn't have too many issues. The first 6 months or so, I had a lot of bleeding, but I had heard that was common. And then from there, it was a really great option for me with where I was at in my life. But once I was getting close to the 5 years and I was going to have to get it removed and have a new IUD put in, I kind of took a step back. And I guess just a little bit of background that this past spring, I was coming off of a really, really, really stressful few months. I was working full time, and then I was also a full-time student on top of that. So I had no free time. I think in 3 months, I was at home for 1 weekend. So it was just craziness. And so I decided to slow down, make some changes in my lifestyle. And as I was simplifying my life, I started to look at my health and make changes there. And that's when I guess I just started paying attention. I had the Mirena for 5 years, and it's so easy. You get it put in and you don't have to think about it for the next 5 years. And I've been in that mindset. And so it wasn't until I was slowing down and started paying more attention to the different aspects of my life, I was like, is this really what I want? I'd been with my partner for 3 years. We lived together. We were just, our lives were, we have much more of a routine than we did when we were in college. And we chatted about it. He was not a fan at all of that. He was always kind of like, had this thing in your body for 5 years, but they don't completely understand how it even works or what the long-term effects are. And so he was a big part in changing my mindset of, wait a second, do I still want this? I started looking into options. I wanted something more reliable than just condoms. I wanted to have a better idea of when I was fertile, when I wasn't. I, like most and women, or just women in general, had grown up with the idea that you're pregnant every single day of your cycle and all that. But I can't even remember how I found your podcast originally, but your Fertility Friday, your website and podcast, where I first heard about the fertility awareness method. And it immediately, I was all about it, not just for the birth control aspect, but just the body literacy and getting to know my hormonal cycles a little bit better and better understand myself. So found out about that. And oh my gosh, I do remember how I listened to your podcast episode about the copper IUD because I wanted something non-hormonal, and found that episode. And of course, you talked about the fertility awareness in that episode. So I, went back and listened to some of your first episodes, the basics, watched your video series, did all those steps, loved everything I was hearing, decided to get the Mirena out and not get the copper IUD, and learn the fertility awareness method. And I've been charting since then, but my cycles, I just couldn't get a handle on it on my own. I tried reading the books, looking everything up online, and was just extremely overwhelmed. Couldn't make sense in my charts. I was seeing cervical mucus all the time. I couldn't track, I couldn't figure out when I ovulated. So I knew that I wanted some more support because I was just starting to associate sex with anxiety and being nervous instead of the enjoyable thing that it is. So that's when I signed up for this class, and it has made a huge, huge difference.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for taking us through that. I do a lot of episodes where, I really like talking to real women and giving you a space to share your stories, because I feel like the feedback that I have from my clients is that they, these are the episodes they appreciate the most, because there's so many women who are listening to your story and like, oh yeah, I had a similar experience. I thought it was interesting that, so you were on hormonal birth control, but it didn't last very long. It was less than a year, and you tried a couple different brands because it was causing you headaches. And of course, the Mirena IUD is a progestin only. So it's not our own progesterone, but it's a progesterone-like substance. But either way, you were avoiding the estrogen. And I think that's a really interesting point, just to point out that, like a lot of women can't handle the estrogen part of it. And so I'm happy, at least, to hear that you were able to find a different method that worked for you at the time, but that obviously got rid of that issue. So, because you didn't mention anything about headaches on the Mirena.
Nope, I didn't. I really didn't. It's hard to tell because I had it for such a long period of time. And when I started it, I'd been on the pill until a month or two before I went into that. So it's hard to tell if there were many changes, but I didn't have the awful migraines, or I know that people have some terrible symptoms, and I didn't have that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as we're recording this episode, it's been 7-ish months that you've been off of it. And one of the questions I always like to ask, because I know that it's a huge mental shift to come off of hormonal birth control. And I feel like recently I've had a lot of interesting conversations about it. What I find interesting is that when you come off of birth control, all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, I could get pregnant. How am I going to manage this? And you have to have all these conversations with your partner. But there's no birth control method that's 100% effective. So there's always a part of me that's like, well, you can get pregnant though if you're having sex with another human being. So how did you manage that fear of getting pregnant immediately the second that it was removed?
So that is a great question. I started to realize this in the last month or so. I kind of did a little bit of selective learning about coming off of the pill. I was really, or not the pill, sorry, getting my IUD removed. I was really, really nervous about it. I had always learned that pretty much if you're sexually active, you're on hormonal birth control. All my friends, that's the same situation. And so I just felt like I was jumping into this crazy unknown. Not having hormonal birth control really stressed me out. And so, but I really, really wanted to be off the hormonal birth control. I wanted to learn what my own cycles were like. I wanted to be able to ovulate. And so I kind of inundated myself with the positives of coming off of hormonal birth control. And I think that I ignored a lot of the things that can happen when you come off of it. So, which I wish I hadn't. I'm glad that I got up the courage to, get my IUD removed. But I do wish that I had a little more reality about it, because until the last 2 months or so after I had it removed, I felt like I was losing my mind. I had awful mood swings all day, every day. I would get really angry about things, and I just had never been angry in that way. Little things that, okay, maybe they might annoy me, but I was legitimately angry about them. They made me want to scream. And then I would go from that. And then in the same afternoon, I would just feel so low and depressed and not be able to do anything, and just like, what are you doing with your life? It was terrible. So it's all over the place. I felt like I didn't even know myself. And when I was entrenched in it, it didn't even cross my mind that would have something to do with coming off of birth control. And, hindsight 2020, there was pretty much an exact correlation between getting the IUD removed and all of that stuff happening. It was about a month after I had the IUD removed that I started to notice that. So I do, looking back, I wish that I had learned a little bit more so I could have had more understanding of it. I thought I was I had no idea. I was like, do I need to see a therapist? I don't even know myself. I don't understand what I'm feeling. I don't trust my own emotions. But I think that the big reason is that I was just trying to be so positive about coming off of birth control that I wasn't looking at the full picture, that it's a little bit rough. It's a big change for your body.
Mm-hmm. Well, and of course, I would ask this question, but so now that it's been about, almost half a year, have you noticed that these kind of ups and downs, like, do they coincide with where you are in your cycle, or are they kind of at random? Has it shifted a little bit from how it was in those first couple of months to now?
It has definitely shifted in the last 2 months, like the last 2 cycles specifically. I haven't had those mood swings at all. I do, I still will I'll notice I'm a little bit more sensitive before my period and might get a little more anxious before it. And I've noticed some sensitivity right after ovulation as well, but it's not an out of control feeling. It's just something that I notice, and it's like, oh, that makes sense. I'm about to start my period in the next few days. No biggie. And it's not just this daily roller coaster of every single negative emotion possible.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, when you're on it, like when you're in the midst of taking it, it's interesting the way that the Mirena is spoken about in particular, or the Mirena is not the only IUD that is a progestin releasing IUD, but the general sense is like, oh, it's a low dose. And somehow the idea that it's just going to stay in your uterus, like as if you don't have a circulatory system. So it's like, it's just not going to go around to the rest of your body, which is interesting. And But that whole concept can leave you with the impression that it's not going to make any other changes and it's not going to have an effect on your mood. And there's a lot of research to show that hormonal birth control does affect your mood. So in some ways, if you knew that, then when you came off of it, there's going to be this period of time where your body is essentially rebounding, so for instance, like the progestin releasing IUDs, some of them do continue to suppress ovulation to some degree, some don't, or some, like, women kind of respond differently. So some women, they don't ovulate while they're taking it. Some women ovulate, but not normally. So maybe they'll ovulate occasionally, and then other women kind of seem to continue to ovulate. But either way, like that, what that means is that it is a hormone in there, and it is disrupting your natural flow of hormones to some degree, some women more than others. And then it is having these effects because you have progesterone receptors like in your brain. So it's not like it's only your uterus. So one of the things I think is interesting, and I know it's one of the topics that I've been asked more about to talk about on the show, which is like what happens when you come off of birth control? What are the emotional effects? And how is that related to the hormones? And it typically takes anywhere from 6 to 12 to 18 months, depending on the type of hormonal birth control, for your cycles to really fully normalize, and for the kind of communication between your hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis to kind of go back to normal, and for your ovaries to rebound back to normal parameters and produce the ovarian hormones, et cetera, et cetera. So now that we're kind of crossing that 7-month mark post birth control, I mean, the cycles aren't 100% in the normal range yet, but we're still like, I feel like that makes sense if you think about it that way, because it does take about 6 months for your ovaries to kind of start getting back to normal after being on hormonal birth control for a while, even the progestin releasing IUD.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes total sense. And I 100% was in that mindset, especially when I first started the Mirena. I didn't know anyone who had an IUD. I don't know if they've become more popular in the last several years, or if it's just because I was pretty young, and so most girls my age were just taking the pill. But I remember being so excited and telling people all about it. I'm like, well, it's really low dose, and it's not, there's not estrogen in it. And I, I'd done all this research, but looking back, I definitely didn't fully understand it. And I even remember saying out loud, like, well, it's just a small amount, and it's released directly into your uterus, so it makes that's somehow different.
But that's what I mean. That's what we are told about it. And the dose may be low, but it has to be high enough to. So just for anyone who's kind of curious, like I mentioned, the progestin releasing IUDs, they don't always fully suppress ovulation. So then the question is, like, well, if you're ovulating, like, how is it, like, if you could be ovulating, and many women do ovulate while they're taking it, how could it possibly work? And so with the IUD, I mean, a big part of the reason that it works is because it really thins the uterine lining to the point that it's too thin to support a pregnancy. So even if you did ovulate and there was fertilization of the egg, and you had an embryo in there, like it couldn't implant because the uterine lining is too thin to support pregnancy. And in addition, it can also have an effect on your mucus production, because you're not necessarily going to be producing fertile quality mucus. You were on it for 5 years. Did you ever see fertile quality mucus? And so then that's also an additional barrier, because the sperm then can't actually enter and swim through your cervix and even gain access to your uterus if you're not producing fertile quality mucus. So just for that information. So I always find it interesting, like, oh yeah, low dose, but the dose has to be enough to prevent you from getting pregnant. So there's still, like, we can call it whatever we want, but we can't pretend like there's no hormones in there. But yeah, I appreciate you taking us through that and sharing your experience with the Mirena. And I think what's of note is that your experience overall was positive, and you actually had the emotional impacts, like kind of like this up and down. And there was a part of me that was wondering, because you mentioned, you're like, I feel like I don't know myself. And I had these moments of, what am I doing with my life? What I find to be interesting is, as a woman who's been cycling all these years without being on the hormones, you get that. And often it coincides with your cycle. And it depends on how you look at it. I mean, there's a certain degree where it's not okay, right? Like, there's a certain degree where you have to kind of like check it out and make sure that there's nothing wrong. But there's a certain part of that where that's your internal guidance system that was waking up again. I don't know.
Yeah.
That was
No,
just a thought.
I absolutely. And I still get those feelings, especially in, I guess, towards the end of my luteal phase leading up to my period I just kind of want to sit and think and evaluate, but that's not what it was.
Yes. Yeah. It was totally.
Yeah. It was every day and just so negative and not that. But I've loved in the last 2 months seeing just a much more positive, smaller version of some of those.
Like not the like wild, crazy, like coming down off of birth control mood swings, but more like a normal cyclical, like moment of contemplative repose.
Yeah. And so now it's so much nicer being open to those feelings and like, okay, let's explore this and maybe take it easy today and just relax and spend some time thinking instead of like my boyfriend coming.
My life is over. Yeah.
Yep. Like we're doing everything wrong.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I really like, I can't underscore how important that is, because there is a certain percentage of women who have a similar experience to that and decide to go back on the birth control because this is like this. I can't do this. Like when I was on it, I was fine. I didn't have these emotions, and now they're all over the place. So, I'm sure there's things you can do to mitigate that in general, lifestyle, diet, nutrient repletion, things like that. But overall, there's a transition phase that your body goes through when you come off of it. And yeah, we need to talk more about the emotional aspect of that, and harder to find research on that. So we'll keep this conversation going. But let's shift and jump into your charts and your actual session so that we can kind of dive into some of the things that you want to talk about. So before the call, you shared with me a few things, but I've got your chart up. So of course, listeners can't see it. But just share with me, I know that you were, one of the things that you were wanting to talk a little bit about was kind of seeing mucus outside of what we would expect. So we'd expect to see your mucus as you approach ovulation, whether it's like the clear, stretchy or the lotiony type mucus. And in your case, you're seeing some of that, but you're seeing it like post ovulatory as well. So yeah, let's maybe start there and just kind of let me know, maybe just propose the question so I know where to focus.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm seeing lotiony mucus after ovulation, and I've noticed that in my charts all the way back to when I first had the Mirena removed, and it's lessening. I'm not seeing as much anymore. Last cycle, I don't think I even had any preemie really after ovulation, but I am just really curious about that. I was listening to one of your podcasts yesterday with a woman named Lisa from Justice, focused on the liver, and she was saying that seeing mucus after, I think she's even mentioned the like creamy lotiony after ovulation, can sometimes be a sign that your body's not clearing out the estrogen as well as it should be and could be. So I just found that similarity. In the last couple months, have been working with an osteopath for a few liver things. So I learned a lot about the liver yesterday, going back and listening to some of your podcasts, and it's so fascinating. It's such a powerhouse and does so much. And I'm just curious if there's any connection between those.
Well, I mean, there could be when it comes to seeing mucus. So in your case, you're seeing what we call non-peak mucus, which is more the lotiony type mucus, and not every day post-ovulatory, but several days post-ovulatory. And so the first thing to say is it's not uncommon. So you're definitely not the only woman to see some post-ovulatory non-peak mucus, but there are several different reasons why that could be. So it's hard to say just it's got to be the liver.
Yeah.
So if you think about from what's happening from a hormonal standpoint, your mucus production is triggered by estrogen. And so, your cervix has all of these specialized cells that are sensitive to estrogen. And so that's why as you approach ovulation and you're producing more estrogen, you're going to see your mucus, before you ovulate. And so one of the reasons, of course, that you might be seeing it post-ovulatory, it could be related to estrogen, but it could be that, so in your post-ovulatory phase, you continue to produce a fairly significant amount of estrogen. But after ovulation, your progesterone surges. And so then you would expect to have quite a bit of progesterone that would then counter those effects of estrogen. And therefore, the progesterone production would suppress the mucus. And basically what I'm saying is, like, by looking at it, we don't know exactly why. It could be that your liver is having an issue clearing estrogen. It could be that your progesterone level may not be high enough to fully suppress the effects of estrogen. And it could also be related to and there's a number of things that could affect progesterone, such as stress and diet and endocrine function. So it's hard to kind of jump to that conclusion. When it comes to liver function, it's always tempting. I always talk about this, but it's like the first thing we think of is like, okay, got to do a detox, got to like take stuff and like improve my liver detoxification. And I mean, really to get an answer of how the liver's functioning and how it's processing estrogen and all of that, that would likely require testing to get that like specific answer of like, how specifically are my liver detoxification pathways working? You know, is it the phase 1 detox? Is it the phase 2? Like, which is causing me this issue, if that's even what it is? And so that can be a little bit more complicated. From a basic standpoint, something that all of us can do is to look at, you know, what we're exposing ourselves to. And the first step would, and the very practical, like minimal type of thing that we could do that can be highly effective, is just to look at what could be, like, what are the stressors? Like, what are we exposing to? So as I say that, let me know where you're at with this. I know a lot of my clients, they discover the podcast, they hear my like militant stance on xenoestrogens, and it kind of changes how they look at all of their products, and they feel overwhelmed because they're like, man, I've got all this stuff in my house. So how do you, like, where do you fall on just that general topic of chemical exposure and just that general sense of like what could possibly be stressing your liver out, if that is in fact what it is?
Mm-hmm. Perfect timing, because I listened to your podcast about xenoestrogens yesterday. I'm pretty good about not having anything too noxious, perfume, any kind of fragrance, and has always bothered me. I can't use like laundry detergent with the smell. Actually, I tried. They advertised it as kind of like the free and clear kind, but with a nice smell, which I don't know why I believe that. I just love the smell of the nice laundry detergent, and I've never been able to use it. So I just went for it, and then thought I was getting a yeast infection, but it was just irritation from the detergent. The second I stopped using it, I had no problems. So that's just an example of how sensitive I am. So blessing and the curse. Blessing is that I have always stayed away from anything smelly. Cleaning products, I tend to stay pretty natural. I can't use anything on my face or hair that has smell, and never really have been able to. So a lot of I've been, especially in the last couple months, really focused on just trying to support my body. I feel I've had just such a major shift with fertility awareness in general, but especially in the past couple of months with my craziness, just, whirlwind of everything, with that calming down. I feel like I'm in a conversation with my body, and I just feel so much more connected with my body, where before I only thought about it if there was an issue, and it was like, okay, I'm going to do so-and-so to fix my body, to fix this problem. And now it's more of like, okay, body, like, how are you feeling? What do you need? What can I do for you? And so I've cut back a ton on drinking. This past summer, I had gotten into kind of a bad habit of having a glass of wine or a beer or a drink in the evenings, just as a nice ritual. And so instead of using alcohol now, we'll just sit and have something else without alcohol. And I've noticed over Thanksgiving, just being with family, I did have some drinks, and I really noticed the effects that it was having on me. But made changes there. I've always been pretty good about eating, but I've added in some supplements. I know that's really common for women coming off of birth control to have deficiencies in B vitamins and different things like that. So I'm taking a B complex and folate and retinol and a multivitamin and magnesium and all sorts of things just for a little while to give my body the extra oomph that I think it needs to help it recover from the hormonal birth control. I've been seed cycling, doing all that, and that's been making a big difference. I've started noticing I don't think that I get quite as much fat in my diet as I should. And so I've noticed it's I have like a weird emotional thing with that. And it really surprised me because I've always been about, whole foods and real foods and, don't go for the fake non-fat foods. But I still have a funny emotional reaction with adding fats into my diet. So I've started kind of small, cooking with butter more. I talked to the butcher this morning to get some fat. I'm going to try and make some lard and tallow just to get a little more of that. I was a vegetarian for quite a while. And for a while, it basically vegan, not on purpose. I worked in Guatemala for a while, and so my options were pretty much just vegetables as a vegetarian. And so I think that my body needs some extra, just good fats and nourishment. So I've been going on a tangent away from the liver right now. But I guess my point is that I'm trying to be gentle with myself and not go too crazy with changes and make sustainable changes, be in communication with myself so that I have an idea of what changes I need to be making. I've just been so busy for the last 6 years and even before that. And this is the first time that I've put such a focus on slowing down and spending more time on myself. And it's been wonderful. And so I love getting these messages from myself. And then they're backed up by your podcasts and other information.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to put it out there, so essentially what I'm looking at with your chart is that ovulation took place somewhere around day 15-ish. Mm-hmm. I say day 15-ish. The shift was a bit gradual, but I do think we talked about that. I think that it looks as though ovulation happened around day 15-ish. And what we see is really just a couple of days. So we're not seeing like something that I would flag as like a huge problem, because you had in your whole luteal phase 5 days of non-peak mucus. Mm-hmm. And in the grand scheme of things, that's not like a huge problem. And I think we might have talked about that in a little bit in our group, which is that, the way that I teach charting is very detailed. And there's a reason for that, because we're wanting to, first of all, I think that was clear that you're actively avoiding pregnancy. So it's really important to have a clear sense of like which days are fertile, which days are not fertile, and how to identify mucus and have kind of like that line in the sand around your fertile window so that you can feel a bit more confident. But with that comes we're kind of putting your chart under a microscope. And so it's really easy to see everything as a problem. Mm-hmm. And so just to put it out there, I'm not sure how much non-peak mucus you were seeing in your post-ovulatory phase, like throughout the last 7 months. But just to put it into perspective, like, yes, we are seeing some, but it is there, but it's not necessarily like, oh my goodness. We're not seeing it every single day. And there are other reasons, I suppose, just for anyone who's listening, who's kind of wondering, like, for instance, if we were seeing it every day, one of the questions I'd be asking you is like, do you think it could be yeast or BV, bacterial vaginosis? Like, because, that's not what I'm seeing here, but I'm just putting it out there for the listeners that it's like, well, if you're seeing kind of lotiony stuff every single day, sometimes you have to kind of look at those things as well. Like sometimes it can be not hormonal. But with that said, I mean, one of the things that you mentioned to me, and you kind of mentioned it just now, is that, you had kind of been drinking, not like so much, but like the occasional one, like several times a week or something like that. And then you had a cycle where you basically didn't during that phase. And then it was during that cycle that you were the driest.
Yep. Yeah. I don't think I had any creamy after ovulation.
And what you were saying about how you feel connected to your body and how you feel like you're in communication with your body, that is one of the values of charting. Often this process is one that takes us on a journey, and it's not just like one and done. It's often something that we're kind of doing over several months as you try different things. And what we spoke about when you mentioned the alcohol thing was, I mean, alcohol is known to raise estrogen levels. And I was saying to you, like, depending on how much you drink, there's research showing that it can raise your estrogen levels by over 50%. So that's like a temporary thing, but it's like anything that can raise your estrogen by 50% can clearly have an impact on the level. Like, so that kind of balance in your luteal phase of estrogen and progesterone. But there's other things that can affect it too. So for example, sleep, how much sleep you're getting, the quality of sleep you're getting. Are you sleeping in the dark? So tell me, I'm kind of just thinking, because I know you were concerned, like, could this be a thing about my liver? And it could be, but I think hopefully what you're getting from our conversation is that what we're seeing isn't like so far outside of the realm that I'm actually concerned. It's more of something that I'm thinking this could easily just be that we have to find very non-invasive ways to support progesterone. And that could be as simple as laying off the alcohol in the luteal phase, or like, you got to live your life, right? So you're going to make decisions. And you can also be your own experiment. You're your own N of one. So you could certainly do like a little trial where you do, you know what I mean? Like one cycle and the other cycle, and then compare to see how that affects it. And then once you have that information, all of a sudden, then when you're informed and you decide. So about whatever it is, like we're just talking about alcohol here, but it could be anything. It could be sugar consumption. It could be sleep. It could be dietary stuff. And it puts you in the driver's seat, because then okay, when I do this is what happens to my cycle. So some cycles I might be willing to do that, and other cycles I might opt not to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I wouldn't say I'm like super concerned or think that something's wrong. This last cycle especially, I just felt so much more comfortable with the birth control aspect of it that I'm just getting really excited about, like the learning about myself and what things, make my chart look really pretty and what things bring up some funky stuff. So I was thinking, before we even got on this call this morning, of this next month, this next cycle, because this cycle is just about to finish up, to see what it's like if I don't drink again, just to see. But you'd ask about sleep. I am a really deep sleeper. I fall asleep within 10 minutes usually. It's not pitch black. We live in like a cabin that's big and lofted, and the outside lights, I guess, you can kind of see in, and we have the I feel like the light from the fireplace would
that's not exactly like blue light from the sun.
Yeah.
Ultraviolet. Yeah.
Yeah. But I've always been a deep sleeper, and I haven't noticed any changes. What do you think I know that you're not supposed to be on your phone or computer as much as you can before bed, or put on the like yellowy orange glow on the screen, the nighttime mode, which I try and do. I could definitely be better, but in general with sleep, I feel very lucky.
Yes. Well, no, it sounds good. I mean, I always ask these questions, especially when it comes to luteal phase stuff. So whether we're talking about that non-peak mucus during the luteal phase, and thinking about ways just to support progesterone production, because it's a lot easier to like put something up over your window just to make it dark. So your question of could it make a difference? Well, I mean, so even though you're a good sleeper, like when your room isn't completely dark, it does to some degree stimulate those light receptors. So your skin, I mean, if you go outside in the sun, you tan, right? So your skin clearly knows when there's sunshine. So we have these photoreceptors on our skin, and it's depending on the type of light that's coming through, it can and does impact your hormone production. And so, in the morning when you wake up and it's light out and you kind of go outside and you see the sun, that sunlight and that kind of blue light exposure, it stimulates your cortisol production because you're supposed to have cortisol in the morning. It's like natural coffee. So that's what makes you feel alert and awake. And if you've ever had the experience of sleeping in a really dark room and you feel super groggy until you turn the lights on or until you go outside, that's exactly what it is. What makes you feel groggy is the melatonin that you're producing when you're sleeping. And that's why you're like groggy until you see the sun, which stimulates cortisol. So then if you are sleeping and then you've got like the light filtering in, street lights or what have you, then to some degree that is kind of disrupting the melatonin. And the melatonin that you're producing when you're supposed to be sleeping, I mean, all of our hormones are all kind of related. So that can suppress progesterone production to some degree. So there are women who, have concerns, whether it's a shorter luteal phase or the non-peak production of mucus or just various things regarding their luteal phase, even temperatures that are a little bit on the lower side. So for instance, like your post-ovulatory temperatures aren't they're not rocking super high. So again, like we just have one chart we're looking at. I like to see a couple charts, a little bit more data. So you can kind of tell, like I'm just kind of pointing it out, but I'm not like focusing on it until we would see maybe the next cycle. But these are things that can and do make a difference. So I have seen just some of those subtle changes, like monitoring the alcohol consumption. If coffee is a thing for you, monitoring that. If sugar is a thing for you, monitoring that. And, addressing that sleep environment, things like that. And sometimes that in of itself is helpful for kind of getting rid of some of the excess mucus production in the luteal phase. I mean, sometimes it's something more than that. And I think with my approach, I think that it's helpful to address all of those very non-invasive basic things that we can just do, like the free things, like sleeping in the dark and like addressing some of these things, because sometimes it's just that. And then other times it's an issue. And so if it persists, even after you've addressed some of those things, then okay, you know what, let me grab a Dutch test to see if my liver really isn't functioning properly. But, it really depends on the signs and symptoms that you're seeing.
Yeah. And I have there's just so many of those little things, and I'm just barely diving into them. And so I am definitely not at the point where I'm like, there's a problem and I need to do this and this. It's kind of like, okay, well, drink less alcohol. And like something I noticed is because I love sugar, and I've been a lot better about it the past like month or so, because I am a sugar fiend, and in the last month and a half or so, I've really been focusing on making sure that I get enough food, and my appetite is, I don't know, it's kind of this weird thing where I love eating and love food and love cooking, but just my appetite, especially in the last couple of years, I noticed this once I became a vegetarian, which was about 2 years ago. And I was a vegetarian for a year and a half, but a year and a half. And since then, my appetite just hasn't been what it used to be. But I have also noticed this last month and a half that I don't have my sugar cravings because I've been eating bigger meals and eating until I feel satisfied, where before I don't know if you've ever heard this, but it's the saying, eat until 2 more bites and you'd be full. And I think part of that is a lot of the nutrition information that we get is geared towards the majority of Americans, and just North Americans in general. A lot of people are heavy. There's a lot of obesity. And so that's what nutrition is focused on. but that's not an issue for me. It's hard for me to keep weight on. And so that's been a slowly shifting mindset as well, of really having satisfying meals where it's not like I'm feeling full, like I'm stuffed and I'm uncomfortable, but I feel full and satisfied, and I don't get hungry in the next hour and a half, where that's kind of how I would have a meal, get hungry an hour and a half or 2 hours later, have some snacks. And I was just constantly eating.
Yep.
And it was fine with what my old job was, and it was fine once I became a student. But I know that as I'm going into teaching, I'm like, I can't just be grazing on food throughout the day as a teacher. And that's not a good sign that I'm not full and satisfied. My meals should be making me full for at least 3 or 4 hours, I would hope. And so that has also been a mindset change. And without even trying to, I just have mostly cut out sugar. And I am guessing that a lot of that has to do with my body isn't starving for energy. Maybe it was before. And even like the other day, I hadn't had a very big breakfast. I'd run out of my Greek yogurt, and I noticed that I immediately went to, I had some kind of candy in the cabinet, and I went towards the candy cabinet at like 11 a.m. And I was like, wait a second, like what is this? And it's like, oh, I had oatmeal and a little bit of trail mix for breakfast. I'm probably just hungry. So I had a second, I made lunch at 11 a.m.
Yeah.
And had a big one.
Yeah. I think what I found as I get older, just as a woman in the world, is that I have less and less patience for things like that, to feel hungry all the time, because it's quite uncomfortable, inconvenient, and disruptive to your life to need to eat every 2 hours. And if you have that experience of like you have breakfast and then you are hungry an hour later, and as a recovering sugar fiend myself, I'm fully outing myself, as I've done many times on the podcast. Looking back, I resonate with what you're saying. Like when you are, reaching for the sugar, sometimes it's because you're actually hungry. And so it's interesting. So these are things just to check in with yourself. And what I'm hearing is that you are listening to your body. So instead of listening to when the media tells you to stop eating, you're actually listening to when your body tells you to stop eating. And that, in your case, is a little bit more than what you were doing before, because you're actually listening to your body's cues about when you're full. And if you're finding that, you're frequently hungry throughout the day, typically the meals are more carb heavy. So when you're eating a more carb heavy meal with less protein and less fat, you're more likely to then be hungry 20 minutes later.
Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
Ride that insulin glucose roller coaster all day, because your blood sugar is being spiked, and then you're crashing again, then you're hungry, and then the candy drawer. So lots to think about. And I mean, one of the things I wanted to check in with you before we wrap up our call today was about the birth control aspect of it. So, you've been charting, we've been together for 5 weeks in the program. You mentioned that you're feeling a lot more confident just about kind of figuring out where you are in your cycle. And so maybe share with us how you're feeling at this stage, and kind of how you've been managing your fertile window, like how you've been dealing with that the period of time in your cycle when you can get pregnant, such that you're not feeling nervous about it.
I am feeling really confident in it. My boyfriend has too. I came into our sessions in this group with a lot of the information, but looking at my charts, I just couldn't apply it. And I just needed that extra boost of confidence. And so we've, post ovulation, we've started having unprotected sex. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that pre-ovulatory quite yet. I'm still getting used to the semen expulsion technique and all of that, and being able to tell the difference between mucus and arousal fluid and all that. So I'm just not quite there for pre-ovulatory, but I just feel so much better, and just better about sex now. We, in the fertile window, when I have mucus present, we use condoms and he pulls out. Just, I like having the extra and not having it be the end of the world or having to take Ella or something if the condom does break. I had gotten fitted for a diaphragm from my doctor when I had the Mirena removed. And we tried it a few times, but I have a really high cervix, and especially in my fertile window leading up to ovulation, my cervix goes really high. I can barely even touch it or feel it. Sometimes I can't. And so taking the diaphragm out was really difficult. When my poor boy, he was late for work one day because it was a 2-person situation getting that thing out. So we have not touched it since. But using just condoms and him pulling out, I feel really confident and comfortable with, and we haven't had any problems. And leading up to my fertile window, so pre-ovulatory, but before I'm in my fertile window, we just pull out. We don't use condoms at this point. Before we were using condoms as well then, but especially as I get more comfortable and we keep going with the group, I am already feeling it and I'm looking forward to feeling it more, but just getting some of that spontaneity back with sex is really nice. After the Mirena, I really, really, really missed that because it was what I was used to the whole time I'd been sexually active. I had the Mirena. And so that's just how I learned how to have sex, is really not worrying much about it. And I didn't think that we would really get that back after having it removed. And so that was also a part of my process of coming off of it, is just wrapping my head around that. And now I'm finding, wait, we can have some of that. It's not gone forever. Sex doesn't have to be stressful for the rest of my life. So I'm really jazzed and excited.
Oh, that's awesome. I know we spoke about in our group just that kind of natural progression that all women go through if they're using fertility awareness, which is like, well, I suppose you start with like sheer terror. That's like the first step, which is pretty normal. And then, but it takes a bit of time before you start to feel comfortable, because there's a difference between having that knowledge in your head and then actually doing it, actually doing the charting. And then there's a whole other level when you start feeling comfortable enough to have unprotected sex. And so starting with post-ovulatory and really getting comfortable in that, but giving yourself enough time to chart, to actually learn how to interpret the signs. So there's no woman who learns fertility awareness and is using it fully pre and post-ovulatory in her first cycle. And if she is, she's likely pregnant.
Yeah, I'm like, I hope not.
If she's trying to avoid, because you're not really, you have to give yourself the time to not only learn it in a book way, but to actually do it and to practice it, and also to give yourself time to feel comfortable. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us as well, because what you're describing is what every woman goes through at the beginning of her fertility awareness journey, which is you're kind of feeling it out. You're putting, so like there's the hot tub and you're like putting your toe in and then it's like, okay, the toe's in and okay, the foot's in, but you don't jump your whole body in right away, because it does take a bit of time to feel comfortable. But just kind of going about it the way that you have and really taking that time. What I always say is that you'll know, Leah, when you get to the point where you've charted enough cycles and you are comfortable and confident enough in interpreting your signs, you'll know. So it's never me that's telling you when you're ready. You'll know when you're ready.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's still like the second half of the luteal phase when we'll have unprotected. And so I'm thinking we'll slowly move closer and closer to being specific about the count of 3 and all that. But I'm
putting
really
the toe
happy
in.
Yes. Yeah.
And I've had a lot of clients that talk about that, because the first time is scary, because again, you can read about it in a book, but like our whole lives, we've been taught that all sex will result in pregnancy. And so, yes, you are not alone. I've had a number of clients who, for the very first cycle, so this would be like after they go through a full cycle without trying the method, you know, it's not like the count of 3 and then the day after, it's like 3 days before the period, just to make sure, right? Like, but this is just this is human nature. So, so I suppose as we kind of bring our session to a close today, did you have any last thoughts, comments, questions before we end?
I am just so thrilled that I found Fertility Awareness and found this group. It's been just every turn is a new surprise. I'm in the middle of this amazing mind shift from just focusing on it for birth control to, wait, like I want to nourish my body and support my body. And no, I do not want a baby right now. And I don't want a baby for several years, but I do want babies someday. And I, just want to give my body what it needs to be as healthy and vibrant as it can. And so I just feel like fertility awareness is like this wonderful new tool in my like self-love toolbox. And I wasn't expecting that at all. I looked at it as kind of a clinical, like this is for birth control replacement for my IUD, but it's so much more than that. So thank you so much for being a big part of this journey.
Oh, well, that's so sweet of you to say. I mean, one of my favorite things is working. So for you, Leah, like you're in the earlier stages of your life here. I'm not going to say how old you are, but you're younger than I am, let's just say. And one of the things that I love is, because for me, it was such a gift for me to discover this when I was 19. And so I really love having the opportunity to work with women at your age where, pregnancy is not a thing for you right now, but fertility awareness can be just as effective if it's right for you, right? So one of the things you said was like, as soon as I discovered it, I knew it was right for me. Not every woman feels that way, right? But when you do and you find it at a young age, there's a lot of women who are listening who, wish that they found it at the stage where they really didn't want to get pregnant, but would have been totally willing to jump on board and learn the method and be able to just avoid the hormones for a while, which is nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, for any woman who's listening and thinking about, like, I've been thinking about doing a class and I'm not sure if it would be worth it, what would you want them to know just about your experience?
I would really suggest doing the group if you are excited about fertility awareness and interested in it, but still have anxiety about it. I don't think that I could have gotten past that without the class. And, of course, that's just me personally. But if you're at a point where there's stress and anxiety surrounding coming off hormonal birth control and charting and all that, it just is so worth it to take the step and do the group. Or I know you have other options of working with you, because it made a huge difference for me being able to talk about it and see it and, have these one-on-one experiences versus reading about it. And there's so much information online and there's more and more coming that it was almost too much information. And so focusing on, the one method and the specifics and really getting the basics down, it's worth it.
Oh, thank you for that. It's so interesting. Things are so different now because you're right. There's so much information out there. And sometimes I don't think about it like that. Like there's you can literally Google it and there's like a, million pages that come up and there's so many different methods and apps and just all the things. So yeah, I never thought of it that way of just like, it can be too much information. So how do you kind of sift through it? So
yeah. Oh my gosh. I joined a couple of those huge Facebook groups. And I know that those are a godsend for a lot of women. But I had to step out of all of them. I was like, I thought I understood something, but now I know nothing. And it's all over the place and you have personal opinions and it's hard to tell what's what. So it was good to just focus in and really learn the basics.
Oh, well, thanks so much, Leah. It was my pleasure having you on the show. As I said before we jumped on the call, I love having the opportunity to do these on-air sessions because then we get an extra hour together, which is really awesome.
Yeah, I love it.
Because of course in the group program, we do get time together, but we get several it's like the private public session because we're doing a session in the group. But yeah, I really like being able to connect. So thank you so much for being part of the Fertility Awareness Reality Series and for sharing your story in such a public way. It's like we're having a very private but public conversation and not everyone's up for it. And so I really appreciate you for just being so open and honest and vulnerable with your own experience. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/238. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Leah. What I really appreciated about our conversation was just that theme, that thread that ran through it, the theme of body literacy, and how over the years she's been in basically conversation with her body and, trying different things and really just working towards finding what's going to work best for her. And now having the additional piece of charting and being able to track her cycles and monitor, just to kind of do those experiments. I always think that, that's one of the ways to put your fifth vital sign in action, which is to really monitor how different things affect your cycle. So for virtually all of the women who I work with, I feel like that's one of the biggest takeaways of the work that we do together beyond charting. So it's that, charting is like the tip of the iceberg when you're using your, fertility awareness for a purpose, when you're using it for birth control, or when you're using it to time sex so that you can conceive. And so that's like the entryway, the very, very tip of this whole conversation. But when you get into it and you start to see how responsive your cycle is to various situations, foods, beverages, whatever the case is, it's extremely enlightening. And there's just something about it that really connects you to your body. And then you start to realize that what you do actually matters and what you do does have an effect on your body. And I feel like we're getting to that place kind of culturally where we're recognizing it more, but often the messages that we still hear from our, medical system and sometimes from our health practitioners is that it kind of downplayed, like, oh, it doesn't really matter, what you eat or what you do kind of thing. So I feel like when you're tracking your cycles, you really can't hang on to those ideas because you can see for yourself how different things affect it. So that was one of, I suppose, my favorite aspects about our conversation, just that I love just to see women kind of on their journey, developing that awareness of how their cycles respond to different aspects of their life. And also to be part of that, be part of that education piece, to be part of that, encouraging, having that encouraging voice or being able to be that encouraging voice, as you continue on that journey. And you are invited to join us in my next round of Fertility Awareness Mastery. We are starting in just about a week if you're listening in real time. And so make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program for details. Now, if you're not listening to this episode in real time, if you're listening to it at some point in the future, then I would encourage you to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program and see, when the next session is available, when we're going to be running the next one. And so I just want to thank you for spending some time with me today, for supporting the show, for sharing the show with your friends, and for being a part of the Fertility Friday community and really helping to spread the awareness about fertility awareness and body literacy and why it's important, why having a healthy menstrual cycle is important for overall health. Why, it's not just when we're trying to have babies that it's actually important to be healthy. It's so ironic that we live in a world at a time where the menstrual cycle is considered only to be relevant when you're actively having children, given the integral role that the menstrual cycle plays in overall health. So it's really fascinating if you think about it. So thank you for being a part of that. And with that said, until next time, be well and happy charting.